Good afternoon or good evening. So we'll start the talk now. If I may request everyone to please be seated. Welcome to Jawaharlal Nehru Planetarium. For those of you who are new here, we are a center dedicated to science popularization and non-formal science education. So just today, if while you walked in, you might have seen that we had arranged a science exhibition which is concluding just now. And we have many such programs like Night Sky Watch, science lectures, and science movie screenings happening concurrently every month. So do visit our website and social media accounts to get more information on this. And ICTS is a collaborative effort by JNP and ICTS. I'm sorry, I meant to say Kaapi with Kuriosity. So I request Gayatri from ICTS to introduce about this series and also welcome you.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening everyone. Thanks a lot for joining us today. So before we start the program, I'll briefly introduce ICTS to you. So ICTS is an interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary institute, and it aims to be an international hub for cutting edge research. So we have three main goals. So one is research. So ICTS contributes to research excellence in theoretical sciences with its high quality faculty together with a large floating population comprising of visitors, postdoctoral fellows and students. So in research there are openings for internships at times and also visiting programs. So and the second goal is conducting programs which aims to bring together researchers from all over the world under one roof to work together to solve the most challenging questions posed by nature. And the third is outreach. So Kaapi with Kuriosity lecture series is part of outreach, and outreach attempts to take the science that we do into the society. And this Kaapi with Kuriosity lecture series is a monthly lecture series. It has been happening for 10 years. So you can, basically the QR code takes you to our social media, and also we'll keep all the new programs updated on our social media and on our link tree, so you can go there. Yeah, thanks again for joining us today. Yeah, over to. Yeah, so I welcome Madhusudan sir to officially welcome the speaker.
So it's matter of great pleasure that I'll be introducing Professor Anindya Sinha, a person whom I have personally seen with great respect, and somebody who was a key factor in sustaining a program at the Planetarium called BioReap, which is flourishing now. So during the formative years when we had teething problems in running the program, so it was Dr. Anindya Sinha who held the ship and steered it safe, and we owe a lot to him for the success of this program. Thank you very much, sir. So this is apart from the formal introduction. So Dr. Anindya Sinha's early research concerned the molecular biochemistry of yeast, social biology of wasps, and the classical genetics of human disease. His principal interests over more than 3 decades have, however, been in the behavioral ecology, cognitive ethology, population and behavioral genetics, evolutionary biology, urban ecologies, ethnobiology, and conservation studies of non-human primates. He is also deeply interested in biological and cognitive philosophies, art and performance studies, and in the tangible and intangible cultural heritage of India, especially concerning current and historical human-non-human relations. Professor Rana's current obsession, however, is to understand cognitive and conscious decision-making by individual non-human beings and engage with their unique lived experiences, explore the traditional ethological knowledge and natural philosophies of indigenous human communities, and reflect on the opportunities that ethnographic rather than ethological explorations offer for our understanding of more than human life worlds. So that in brief is Professor Anindya Sinha. So we welcome him once again on behalf of the Planetarium and ICTS. And he has also written an excellent book on consciousness in primates, which edited, which I urge people interested in this area to take a look at. Thank you very much. So now it's yours. And as a token of our appreciation and gratitude, we hand over a memento to Dr. Anindya Sinha. Please.
Thank you very much, Madhusudan, who's such an old friend. It's wonderful to be here, although this building is new. We didn't have this earlier, and I spent about 7 to 8 years, I think, with Madhusudan and Shailaja, who has retired. So it was, those were heady days. We were talking a lot about new forms or new disciplines within biology to a lot of young students, and it was perhaps one of my first experiences in teaching, in popularizing science. But whatever Madhusudan said about me is not entirely true. I think he was the main anchor which kept the program going till May of this year. So that's a wonderful occasion, and a wonderful occasion to come and speak to you after you spent so many years in this in the planetarium. So I'm going to speak a bit about my macaques. These are non-human primates, which many of you know. You see them around in almost all cities, towns, villages of southern India. And my work has looked at various aspects of the lives of these macaques, and today I will speak a bit about the mind and consciousness. Now, some of these concepts might be a bit complex, so please do stop me if you want some clarification, but we can also have detailed discussions after the talk. One thing I've realized in the course of my studies is that poets, philosophers often understand many of these forms, living forms, far more than scientists do. And they express them, and an advantage that poets or writers have is that they express their thoughts so much more beautifully. So I will begin actually with a few lines from an American writer and a psychologist, Henry Beston, who said, "We need another and a wiser and perhaps a more mystical concept of animals. For the animal shall not be measured by man. In a world older and more complete than ours, they move finished and complete, gifted with extensions of the senses we have lost or never attained, living by voices we shall never hear." Now, while this is absolutely true, and this could very well be a very poetic summary of all that I'm going to talk to you today about, nevertheless, we never say die. So in the course of these decades, we have been trying to understand other beings, right? Other non-human beings. The main problem, of course, is that they cannot communicate with us as we cannot with them. And this often becomes a problem, and which I will talk about in the course of the work. So basically, I'm going to speak about whether the mind of the macaque has consciousness, and of course there's a big question mark, and that question mark will remain even at the end of this talk, and I think it will remain for a very long time for philosophical reasons as well. But before that, before we go into the actual mind, an interesting question is, why do we want to study primate consciousness? Remember, we are primates as well. Right? So when I say primate consciousness, of course, it's about humans. We are conscious beings, and that gives value to our lives, right? So when you consciously think of many events in your life, or decisions that you took, or experiences that you had, you're able to ruminate, you're able to think about them, and that often gives you pleasure. In fact, it has been said that a life lived without consciousness can never be pleasurable. Now, that of course depends on who's living that life, and that I don't think can be addressed, the question can be addressed, but I think it's important to ask what about non-human primates? Why do we want to understand whether the monkeys that we see around us, why are they conscious, and if they are conscious at all? And the first reason, of course, and this is the main reason why I started studying consciousness, is to ask a simple question: what is it like to be a monkey? And the simple answer is we will never know. But then, if you look at it by extension, will I ever know what it is to be you? Any one of you. I might spend my life with you, but I will still never know what it is to be actually you. In fact, I will extend that argument to even make you think about, do you really know yourself how you were 10 years ago? I think there's so much, we remember certain events, we know what were the shaping influences, but many a time we have lost track of who we were. And often people say, I've changed so much. And that change is also so important for us. How do we pinpoint who we are actually? Because it is so contextual on space and time. The second, of course, is a question in evolution. How did we come to be what we are today? Because after Darwin, and I would argue that this is only from Western science, if you look at Indian traditional sciences, Indian traditional knowledge systems, we have often believed that we are related to all other beings. And therefore, in some sense, our minds are related to those of the other species. This, of course, was formalized by Darwin in Western science, and he clearly pointed out that even our mind, with its all various expressions of emotions, thoughts, desires, seem to have a biology, an evolutionary biology linking us to other beings. Third, can we understand more fully how the primate brain works? This is the decade, or this is the century of the brain. We are very, very keen to understand how our brain functions and those of other species, and therefore where does consciousness sit in the brain is an important question. And finally, and this I think affects each of us here, will our knowledge of primate consciousness influence the way we relate to them? Right? So if I tell you that I feel pain when you hit me, you will be cautious about hitting me. Right? So clearly, if we know that other beings, other non-human beings also have certain conscious features like us, perhaps it will influence the way we interact with them. Right? But I'll come to them towards the end of, come to this point towards the end of my talk. Now, normally when we do science, we often deal with certain hypotheses, right? Or certain constructs, which we try to follow through in order to answer some of the burning questions that we have. And for me, and I'm not the first person to do this, for me, consciousness seems to have its origin in social complexity. Of course, we are conscious some of the time during your daily activities, but I would suggest that the most demanding tasks that your mind addresses is that of social relationships. We live in complex societies, we deal with a lot of relationships, we make new relationships, we maintain them, sometimes we break them, and this requires a considerable investment of not just our thoughts, our cognition, but I would argue even our consciousness. And the question is therefore, if you look across primate lineages, non-human primate lineages, are we seeing social complexity? And when you see an increase in social complexity, does this lead to enhanced cognitive capacities? Cognitive capacities is all that you're capable of doing with your mind. But when you look at these cognitive abilities, one aspect of this is consciousness. And a simple question that I ask here is, do we know whether when we have complex cognitive processes, are we also what is called, it's just a term, don't remember, if you don't remember, it's not important. Phenomenological consciousness is an awareness of your own subjective experience. If at this time, some of you are feeling bored with my talk, and you are aware that you're feeling bored with my talk, you are phenomenologically conscious. And the question is this related to our the complexities of our mind independent of consciousness, right? And we'll discuss more of this. Another very important philosophical and a scientific point is that how complex can one being's mind be in the absence of language, right? Now, it's not that other beings don't have languages, but they do, but it's much, much simpler than human language. And how much of, therefore, the fact that I can give this talk today, I can remember, I can analyze what I'm speaking, how much of this is dependent on my language? If I didn't have language, would I be capable of doing this? Now, and finally, if you ask, can these cognitive attributes, this ability to analyze, the ability to have thoughts, right? How do we look at these behaviors in other species, in other beings, non-verbalizing? You can stand up and tell me, I'm so uninterested in your talk. A macaque can't, right? A dog or a cat that you have at home cannot express itself to you through language, but may express yourself through behavior. But would you know that the behavior that you're seeing in them, that is reflective of consciousness? And this is an important point, and this is what the subject of my talk is, and I will come to. And therefore, what could be the behavioral correlates? What kind of behavior can I see in you that will tell me that you are perceptually conscious, which is to have a mental state, reflectively conscious, that you're thinking about your mental states, and is it ever possible to study what is called phenomenal consciousness, your awareness of your feelings, your sensations. I spoke about pain. To have pain is to be phenomenally conscious, to be aware that you have pain. And the question simply is this: do I know that you feel pain? Right? And how would I know? Right? So some people, when they feel pain, remain very quiet. And we cannot then assume that they are not feeling pain. It's possibly that they do not express their pain in ways that I do. And this, we must remember, is a very clear possibility for other species, members of other species as well. So there are therefore different structures or fundamental principles on the basis of which we can try and construct our studies of the mind or of consciousness. And one of the most important ones here is the theory of mind. And basically, and I'm talking of primates here, of course, because that's what my talk is about today. We know that many primates know and predict each other's behaviors. So does the dog or the cat that you live with in your home. But the important question is, do they also know your belief, your emotion, your intention? Right? So this is really a very fundamental problem. And to have a theory of mind, which Premack and Woodruff first spoke about in a very early paper in 1978, they said that the ability to attribute beliefs, knowledge, a mental state to others and to yourself is to have a theory of mind. If I know that you're happy, I know then you have a mental state. I can recognize a mental state in you, and I know that I'm also happy, so I recognize a mental state in me. And once I'm able to recognize a mental state in oneself or in others, I have a theory of mind, right? So this is basically very, very important, because what we are trying to understand is, do we recognize the mind not only in other beings, but in yourself as well? And this I call a hard problem, because when I see complex behavior, and let's say a behavioral response to you that you and I are involved in, do I know whether we are predicting behavior or whether we are predicting beliefs, right? So for example, if you come and punch me on the nose and I run away from you, I will know that every time you're coming towards me in a particular way, I should run. So what am I doing? I am at the simplest predicting your behavior. That when I see you walking in this fashion, it's likely that I will be hit by you and therefore I should move away. On the other hand, do I predict your motive? You're walking towards me, but I somehow know that today you will not hit me. You will come here, put arms around my shoulders, right? So the important question is, do we learn behavioral associations? And I tell you that we do, but we also learn how to predict a motive or a mental state. And the difference between this is that for when you're predicting simple behavior, it's a trial and error mechanism, right? So I'll give you another example. You're speaking to a friend and you're crossing a road, right? So you don't even think about when you're crossing the road whether you should look left and right. You automatically do it. And this is because it's an associative learning, that if you don't look left and right, you could be hit by a car. So that is a prediction of behavior. On the other hand, when you're crossing this road on a Sunday, you could stop and tell your friend, hey, why are we looking left and right? There are no vehicles on this road on a Sunday. In that case, it's a knowledge-based system and you're predicting motives, that the car will not come today. It's not simply that if a car hits me, I shall die, right? So there is a difference, but this is a continuum, and I'll talk more about this. So the important question is, whether we read behavior or we read minds, there are several problems associated with it, and I'll very simply tell you what it is. First is that when you talk of mentalism, I'm thinking, I'm responding, you are actually reliving or a behavioral experience, right? So in some sense, therefore, your mental, my assumption that you are bored or you are happy is based on certain behavioral experiences that I have seen you have, right? It's as simple as that. And I can also project this experience. When I eat an ice cream, I feel happy. So when I see you having an ice cream, I will assume that you feel happy as well, and that is called a projection of experience, right? Now, these are all manifestations of mentalism, of having a mind which is capable of doing various functions. And the third is sometimes invoking a mental state allows us to explain many behaviors far more simply than if we were using a brute force method of reading behavior. I'll give you an example of this, right? So imagine that we are all macaques and we all live together in a group, right? And we learn, so don't worry about the lower part of the figure, just look at the upper part. We live in this group of, we are living together, and these are the behaviors that I see. I see that when I have a banana, B, one of you is B, you grab it. If C has a banana, B follows C. When there are bananas on a tree, B climbs a tree. When D has a banana, B grooms D, right? Which is a very friendly kind of behavior between monkeys. When E grabs B's bananas, B threatens E, right? Now, if we see all these behaviors, you can learn the association. If there is a banana on the tree, B will climb it. If I have a banana, B will try to take it from me. And these are all separate behavioral associations that all of us learn right through the day, right through our lives. On the other hand, let us say that we have a conception of a mind, and when we see these associations, if I make a hypothesis or a theory that B has a mind, and whenever B sees bananas, she wants it, right? If I make this assumption, then I will see quite a few behaviors which I will be able to explain through this, and more importantly, I will be able to make predictions, right? So B grabs my bananas, B climbs tall trees to bananas, B follows others who have bananas. These are all abstractions that I make from these observations. And when I then say that perhaps B has a mind, and right now B's mental state is to want bananas, I will say, guard bananas from B. Do not try to take B's bananas. Give bananas to B when he is needed as a friend. These are not experiences that I have had, but I'm able to successfully predict these because I have invoked a mental state in B. And that is why the theory of mind, if we have it, considerably simplifies our social interactions, social self-knowledge, prediction of others' behaviors, and of others' mental states. Right. So now let me move out to talk a bit about the bonnet macaque, which is a species many of you, as I said, who live in Bangalore must have seen. They are, of course, sadly disappearing from all human-dominated areas. But let me just give you an idea about this. So this is a very ecologically variable, adaptable species, very socially labile as well. It's widely distributed in southern India, but only found here. It's endemic. They normally live in multi-male, multi-female or unimale groups, which vary a great deal in size. They are generally, and I've used some terms here, I'm sorry, but I'll explain them. So they are philopatric, which means females, when they are born into a group, live their entire lives in that group. And when they reach maturity, they set up dominance hierarchies. I'm sure all of us know dominance hierarchies. In females, it's very, very strong. And if A is dominant to B and B is dominant to C, then A will be dominant to C. So it's a linear transitive relationship. Males typically, once they reach maturity, tend to emigrate. They tend to leave their natal groups. They can leave as juveniles or as adults. But this is not invariable. Sometimes they go, sometimes they don't go. They stay back in their group. They could also go and come back, or they could keep moving from group to group, right? So it's extremely flexible. And males, usually unlike females, have very unstable dominance hierarchies. And I'll come to this in the discussion because this is a very interesting situation where within the same species, the same group, males and females have completely different mechanisms by which they set up dominance hierarchies. And that's quite fascinating. I'll come to that. Males in bonnet macaques are also unusual because they develop very strong bonding, which parallels those of females. And that itself is interesting. And finally, the society is what is called promiscuous. So every male is able to mate with every female is able to mate with every male, and there are ample mating opportunities. There's mutual tolerance amongst males and females, and very subtle female mate choice. Now, what you get from this is that if you think your life is complex, the life of the macaque is no less complex. They clearly have many decisions that they have to make in the immediate, in the long term, and what you will also see, and this is very important, that there is nothing which is very typical. There is so much of variability. Every individual has so many different kinds of choices that they make. I would be very hard pressed to tell you what is a typical bonnet macaque like. And I think this is true for all non-human species, except for two reasons. We have never considered this. First, we have this inherent superiority, feelings that we are superior to all other beings, all other species, and hence they cannot be as complex as we are, which is completely wrong. And secondly, we think that they are all very similar. You've seen one cockroach, of course you've seen them all. You've seen non-monkey, you've seen them all. Nothing could be further from the truth, and I think it's time that our zoological thinking of other beings, of other species, changes, right? And the reason why I'm saying this with so much of conviction is because we have been conducting a project which over 22 years, in which more than 2,000 individuals have been identified by their face alone. And as you can clearly see, they look very different from each other. Here are 5 males from 5 groups in Bandipur, where we've done our long-term work. And as you can see, their hairstyles are really very different. But what I wanted to tell you also, and we can discuss this later, is that each individual there is unique, not because of his hairstyle alone, but because of his behavioral decisions, the strategies that he takes in the short term and in the long term. And this, I think, owes a great deal to their minds, because there's individual variability in the way their minds work as well, and therefore the decisions that they make. Right. Now, there are several studies, several different kinds of studies that we have done so far, and I won't have time. I'll talk about one study to a certain extent, but these are what we have tried to understand. We've looked at several complex behavioral processes and tried to understand their cognitive capacities. We've looked at social knowledge and how that tells us about how macaques look at themselves as selves. We've looked at intentionality. Do they intentionally behave in certain ways? Do they attribute capacities to other individuals? And this becomes a basis for their deceptive behavior on occasion. They use referential gestures, which means they use gestures to point. For example, two macaques, when they're grooming each other, the individual who's being groomed can indicate to the other one which part of the body she wants to be groomed in, and immediately the groomer changes. And we've now documented a new form of communication where in a particular group in Bandipur, the juveniles started interacting very intentionally with human beings. They developed new call, they developed a new gesture only to communicate with humans carrying food, but they never used this system with their members of their own species. But again, I'll talk about this later. We've also looked at how tools are used and manufactured, and we think they may have some idea about what kind of tool does what. Yeah, but I don't have time to talk about it. There is also culture. Now, many of us for a very long time thought we were the only species which had culture or traditional practices, until Jane Goodall, whom many of you know of and who passed away very recently. Jane Goodall first showed that in the chimpanzees that she was studying in Bombay actually had cultural practices. And subsequently, we now know that the great apes have many, many cultures that are propagated across generations through social learning, but we have also, from very early on, documented these kind of cultures in bonnet macaque populations, right? And again, we'll talk about this some other time. The important point is what could be the cognitive mechanisms which underlie these complex behaviors in terms of their functioning, but also in terms of their brain. And importantly, for the purpose of today's talk, and again, I don't have an answer, but it's an important question, are bonnet macaques phenomenologically conscious of these processes? Do they know what they know? Of course, I know. I know what you know to a certain extent. I know what you don't know as well. You definitely don't know what is coming in the next slide, but I do. So I can recognize knowledge in others and in oneself. The question is, are bonnet macaques also capable of knowing this? Right? Now, I will today talk about social knowledge and possible conceptual models of the self. And one important point here, which we can again discuss later. I'm sorry, again, these are big words, but basically, when we look at knowledge and we have knowledge, right? I know what Madhusudan is like because I've interacted with him. He has an idea of what I'm like. But when we have these knowledge systems, there are certain innate cognitive capacities I was born with, which allows me to know and acquire knowledge. But there are also subjective experiences, and when I say ontogenetic, it means over your lifetime. So over your lifetime, you've had so many experiences which have allowed you to learn, and together they allow you to execute this complex process. And the question is that this is true for macaques as well. I'm giving this to you. We can again talk about this later. But what we don't know is, as I said, are they subjectively aware of their own knowledge and the decisions that they take? When you come to me threateningly, right, I have that knowledge of you that when you walk towards me in that fashion, you can come and hit me, and therefore I should take a decision to go away. And if I'm aware of this decision, that's what I'm asking. I'm subjectively aware. The question is, do macaques also recognize, and are they subjectively aware when they take these decisions based on their own knowledge? Right. Now, I'm going to tell you a story of a particular kind of behavioral interaction. And the reason why this is very important is because how do you know that your dog or the cat or even your friend sitting next to you has a mind? How do you know this? You know this when you see your friend, human or non-human, take a particular decision. And when you take a decision, that's when you recognize that there is something going on which is allowing you to take a decision A over a decision B. And that's what we ask in the macaques as well. Now, there are very complex interactions that they have. I'm going to talk about one particular interaction. Remember A, B, C, 3 females, and that's the dominance hierarchy. Now, there could be a situation, and we've seen quite a few of these, where B and C, any 2 females, B and C, are sitting and allo-grooming or going through the hair of each other's, and they suddenly look up and see A, who's a female dominant to them, and these are all females, A, who's dominant to them, approach them. Now, several things can happen at this time. One of the things is that one of them decides to leave, right? And we saw many such instances where in 85% of the cases, it was C, the most subordinate female. Remember, B and C are sitting together, A is approaching them, C, who's the most subordinate individual, decides to leave. And this happened in 85% of the cases. Now, what is a simple explanation, right? Imagine 3 of us, 2 of you and me, right? And I know that I'm the most subordinate amongst the 3 of us. Why? Because frequently I've been beaten up by both of you. And I could never beat you up, right? So I'm the most subordinate. So if I'm sitting with one of you and the one who's most dominant amongst the 3 of us approaches, I say, oh, I better go. And why do I go? Because you don't want to be in the presence of 2 high-ranking females, right? And therefore, this is a decision that you can learn, that when 2 dominant females are with me, both of them could beat me up, I better go, right? So this could be how they may have learned. But what happens in 15% of the cases where C stays and B, who's dominant to C, decides to leave? Right? Now, this has been seen by several primatologists in the past on various species. They've talked about it, but they've never analyzed the data because they felt that these were exceptions. Maybe it's not so interesting. And therefore, let's move on and look at the 85% of the cases. And here is an important lesson that I learned, that the 15% is actually what is most exciting. Because when you see exceptions to the rule, you must ask, why are they different from the general pattern? Why are they doing something so different that the others are not doing? And therefore, for those of you who are studying science or are practicing researchers, remember, never, ever neglect the outliers. Don't only look for rules and laws. Don't only look for means and averages. Look at the exceptions, look at the variances, because biology is actually the science of the variance. And the variability is what is exciting. Anyway, so now, having seen this, I asked the simple question, why did B leave in these cases? And to cut a very long story short, I'll show you 2 graphs. Don't get too worried about them. I'll tell you what they are. On the x-axis here is the social attractiveness of C. I looked at all these interactions, and in the case where C decides to stay or leave, I looked at their social attractiveness. Now, what is social attractiveness? It's the probability which is of a female receiving grooming from all the other females in the group and at very high levels. So you receive very high levels of grooming, but you get it consistently from across all females. So you have a very high mean grooming received and very low variance, right, of grooming received. And therefore CV, which is a coefficient of variation, don't worry too much about it, is what seems to measure how popular I am. So if you see me for a year, let's say, and you keep sampling my behavior, you will see whenever you look at me, I'm talking to someone else. And then you notice that whoever I'm talking to is not the same individual repeatedly, but different individuals, and that tells you that I am a very socially attractive individual. And on the B here is the proportion of approaches that B decided to leave. And what you see very interestingly is that whenever C is a very socially attractive individual, B decides to go, although she is dominant to C. Right? So that's what this told us. Now, who does A approach? Right? A is approaching B and C. And in the next graph, and one thing I must tell you is that if you plot this with the social attractiveness of B, you don't see this pattern at all. So it's really about the social attractiveness of C that makes it important. In another case, what we looked at, the proportion of approaches received by B. Now you can look at when A is approaching B and C, B is a particular individual, C is another individual. Does the proportion of A approaching this pair, does it depend on the social attractiveness of B or C? You might suggest that it would be C, because earlier we saw that the social attractiveness of C is important, but that's not what it is. What you find is whenever B in that pair, whenever B is a very socially attractive female, A is very likely to approach this pair. Right? So in one case, I approach two females going by the social attractiveness of B, but when I approach them, one of them decides to leave. If C is very socially attractive, B leaves. That's basically the story. And this told me that this is a very complex decision that individual females are making. Now, what happens if A actually reaches them, right? Two things can happen. One, when none of them retreat and A reaches them, you find that the approaching female A, if she shows grooming, she will invariably groom B. But if she shows aggression, she shows it towards C. And that's very logical, right? C is the most subordinate. So you come and show aggression towards her. But if you want to groom, you groom with the more dominant one. And that we also saw earlier, that when B was a very socially attractive individual, A was very likely to go towards them, right? So that seemed to make sense. But what seems to be interesting here, and okay, before I come to this analysis, what it clearly seemed to show is that dominance is something that the individuals seem to know. And they seem to know the relative dominance ranks of two individuals, because when A comes, she will groom B but show aggression towards C. Why? Simply because they have a dominant-subordinate relationship, and I seem to know that. On the other hand, I also seem to go by social attractiveness of other individuals. So I'm aware of the social attractiveness of other individuals, and I decide to approach if B is very socially attractive, and B decides to go if C is very socially attractive, right? So they are bringing in this knowledge into their decisions. We did a logistic regression analysis to just take a look at it a little more rigorously. And what is logistic regression? You look at the probability that a certain variable, which is should I go or should I stay, it's a sort of a binary, right? And does it depend on certain properties which are called the independent variables? So this is a dependent variable. Should I go or should I stay? This will depend on what the room is like, what the people here are like. Should I give the lecture or should I not give the lecture? And what are the independent variables we chose? An individual, B or C, and here we were looking at B. Let's just look at B. Remember, 15% of the cases where B leaves. It could depend on her own rank, because it's a unique rank in the group. It could depend on the rank of the approaching female, or the rank difference with the approaching female. If I am B, what is A's rank, or what is the rank difference between A and B? It could also be the rank of C and the rank difference with C, but these are ors, right? I might know you're subordinate to me, or I might know how subordinate to me you are. and the social attractiveness. I could be a socially attractive individual, or what is the difference in attractiveness of C from me? Right? Now, so when I plotted these as independent variables, I obviously took either this or this, either this or this, and here, of course, these are all independent, other independent variables, right? And when I did this, again, to cut a very long story short, this is what we saw. First, the probability that B would leave, right? 15% of the cases depended on, number one, B's own dominance rank. So B can be any female in the group, right? As long as A, B, C are three females sitting together and interacting. So when B becomes more and more subordinate, she is more likely to go. Second point, as A's rank difference with B became less, she was more likely to go. And this is not surprising. If you were an assistant professor in a university, who would you compete with? Other assistant professors. You're not going to take on the head of the department, nor will you take on a PhD student. They are far more subordinate to you. The head of the department is far more dominant to you. You compete with those with whose strength you match, right? And this made sense that when A and B were closer in rank, but B was still subordinate to A, she had a greater probability of leaving. And of course, when C became more and more subordinate to B, she left. Now this is surprising, right? And the reason why we think this is happening is because, although this was not statistically significant, subordinate females in this group were very socially attractive. And therefore, it seemed that when the individual you're sitting with is very subordinate, you better go, because she is likely to be more socially attractive. Interestingly, the probability that B will go did not depend on the absolute dominance ranks of A, B, or C, and interestingly, social attractiveness didn't come into the model, right? And that's interesting. That although we seem to show evidence that they know social attractiveness, they did not seem to respond to it because it didn't show up in this model. The model could be limited, but we try to interpret this. And the conclusions, therefore, that we draw from here is that bonnet macaque females appear to know their own dominance ranks and those of other females relative to their positions. Because when we put in absolute rank of A or absolute rank of C, the model did not work. It was only through rank difference that the model worked. So it seems that if I know that Madhusudan is dominant to me, I need to know this in terms of how dominant to me he is. I do not know that he is number 3 in the dominance hierarchy here. I just know he's 3 ranks above me, right? That's what it seems to indicate. Second, during interactions with multiple individuals, social decisions were made based on integrated information. Who's coming? Who's sitting with me? What's our rank difference? What's my own rank position? And then I take a decision. So knowledge is very integrative. And this is interesting. They seem to know the social attractiveness of other females, but this knowledge seems to be utilized in terms of their knowledge of dominance ranks, right? Social knowledge did not figure in the models. And this is interesting. And I'll give you this example. You are driving down to the planetarium to attend this talk. Let's say you're in a car and there's another car which approaches you and drives extremely rashly and comes and hits you. Now what do? So you get off the car and you walk towards the other driver because you want to have a word with that driver. And as you walk towards this individual, you see that this individual, let's say it's a man, a male, he rolls up his sleeves and you see bulging biceps. What he does after that is even more frightening because he takes out a little knife and polishes its blade as he walks towards you. Now what do? Right? You decide that Rana's lecture is more important than picking up this fight. You get into the car and come off to the planetarium. What have you done? Do you know that individual? Do you know whether he would have hit you or stabbed you? No. You just look at the presence of the knife, the fact that he's showing it. You look at his biceps and you say, I don't have those biceps. I better go. And I think that's what they might be doing. Knowledge could be hierarchical. You may not know certain aspects, but if you have learned in the past certain correlations, you might take a decision, because it's a question of life and death, on the basis of those correlations. And that's what I think the macaques might be doing as well. Right. So what are the overall conclusions we draw from this? First, individual macaques appear to have experiential knowledge of the social attractiveness of other individuals. They don't seem to remember pairwise interactions. It's cognitively much more complex. If I have to know all the pairwise relationships in this group, it'll be so much more difficult than to say, I know this individual is popular, that individual is not that popular, this individual is a few ranks above me, those individuals are few ranks below me. It's so much easier to know than to know every pairwise interaction. And that's what macaques seem to be doing. I haven't presented all the data, but I can talk about it. They are also knowledgeable about their own positions in the hierarchy and the relative dominance ranks of the other individuals, and this tells you something extremely important. They are able to abstract and mentally represent these attributes of their own and of others. I know after I've interacted with you who's dominant to me, who's subordinate to me, how I should behave appropriately, who's more socially attractive than the other. How do I store this information? Clearly, I have ways of storing this information, and that is what I'm calling abstraction and a mental representation. And I'll come to this in a minute. And this is where language may be important. And I'll just come to that in a minute. Secondly, during triadic interactions, when three individuals are interacting with each other, dominant individuals behave as if they believe that an approaching individual is targeting their socially attractive companion. When I'm B and C is very socially attractive, I decide to go. Why? Because I believe that A is approaching C. Because C is so socially attractive, A must be coming to C. But you know very well from the data that A actually comes to a pair when B is more socially attractive. So B when she was A had targeted B. Now when she is B, she should know that A must be coming to me, but she doesn't seem to know. When C is socially attractive, she leaves, and I'll come to that. Therefore, individuals attribute motives to other individuals. They possibly develop a belief system. A must be approaching C. That's a valid. It may be right or it may be wrong, but they seem to develop a system. But, and this is important, they fail to project their own experience onto others. When I was A, I came to B and groomed her and showed aggression towards C. When I am now B, I should know that A will come to me and show aggression towards C, but I don't seem to know. So therefore, I'm unable to project my own experience onto others. And I'll just digress a bit to say that's very interesting that the great apes, chimpanzees or bonobos, for example, are capable of projecting their own experience onto others. And how has this been shown? Two individuals do a cooperative task where one individual knows where the food is but doesn't have access to it. Another individual comes into the room, has access to the food but doesn't know where the food is. They soon learn that this individual will point and that individual will take the food and they will share it. When the roles are reversed and this individual who learned to point is now coming in, she immediately waits for this individual to point and she goes and recovers the food. So she's able to take on that role that she has played in the past and recognize that this role is now being played by someone else. Macaques fail to do this. They will learn afresh that that individual will point and I will go get the food. So in some sense, therefore, if you look at it in human terms, chimpanzees are able to conceptualize their roles in a cooperative task, but macaques don't. They learn by brute force what they must do. But what is fascinating is that every experiment, the macaques solve the task much faster than the chimpanzees did. So which tells you, and this is something, this variation we see amongst us, brute force methods are looked down upon, saying, oh, this is not sophisticated. This is just by force that someone does it. But it's always or maybe in most cases, it's efficient. And in your life, you'd rather be efficient than just be cognitively sophisticated. And therefore, the next time you say, oh, you don't know the good way to do it, you're doing it by brute force method, it's fine. That individual will solve the problem much faster than you may actually do it, right? And so that's a lesson you learn. So there are certain important problems, and yeah, I will finish another 5 minutes extra, maybe in 10 minutes. Yeah. So what are the important problems that this brings up? And I think it's interesting to think about them. We don't have the answer. First is, of course, you acquire knowledge through experience, which is important. And what we found was that when you measure me talking to others, you can either count how many times I talk to anyone in this room, or what you can do is you can just look at me. And if I'm talking, then you have a rough idea what proportion of the time this individual is talking, right? And that is duration, the latter one. The earlier one was frequency. And it seems that when macaques are acquiring information, they do it through allogrooming duration, not through allogrooming frequency, which is cognitively obviously a simpler thing to do. Second, how do they assess individual ranks? Do they look at all pairwise interactions to see and memorize it, to know who's dominant and who's subordinate in a pairwise fashion, or do they do associative transitivity? I've seen A beat up B and B beat up C, so A must be dominant to C. So that is a pair, that's a sort of an arranging individuals. That is cognitively obviously easier to do, except that we have no evidence for either way. We do not know how macaques actually remember. I personally think that they are actually looking at social transitivity, but I don't have evidence for this, right? What is the nature of mental representation? When I say dominant, you know exactly what I'm saying. When I say subordinate, you know what I'm saying. If I say macaque and I say dog, you know exactly what I'm saying. This is another extremely important function of language. Language is not for communication alone. Language is also a mechanism by which you label objects, you label ideas, you label categories, you label concepts, and you use them. And the question of macaques is, how do they form these abstract categories of dominance and subordination? They must be storing this information in some form. It's easy for us with language. We don't know what they do. Maybe they're doing what I call visual behavior matching. I'll give you an example. Two people suddenly come into the room. You have no clue who they are, right? But I ask you, looking at them, do you have an idea what could be the nature of their relationship between them? And you say, maybe they're married to each other. How do you know? You know because you have a template, a visual template of what it is to be married, right? You may be mistaken, you may have generalized to a certain extent, but you then match the behavior of these two individuals to the template that you have, and you may decide, they are married, right? It's a concept that you're testing through visual behavior matching, and maybe that's what the macaques are doing, but we don't have an answer. And finally, therefore, and this is what I mentioned, how do they categorize and code information in their cognitive architecture, because they're a non-verbal species? Maybe they have grunts and other hoots and other kinds of languages that they associate with a concept, with an individual. We don't know yet, right? Therefore, this is my conclusion. I will, of course, take another 2 minutes that I asked for to talk about consciousness, but let's just look at the conclusions. A bit complex, but I'll go slowly through it. I did not give you evidence for this, but they seem to be capable of solving complex social problems through tactical deception, just as an example, which I didn't talk about. They may also be able to inherently take complex decisions based on their experiential knowledge. I know who's dominant, I know who's subordinate, I know by how much this individual is dominant to me, that individual is subordinate to me, and I take a decision on the basis of this information. They appear to have comprehensive knowledge of the positions of other individuals in the hierarchy relative to themselves, as well as the relationships that exist between other members of the group. Individual macaques may thus be able to form rudimentary mental representations generated by direct experience of themselves and of their social companions. And finally, they may have a limited capacity to recognize their own mental states and those of their adversaries and act upon the differentials in this knowledge state. Again, I'm sorry, I couldn't give you an example of this, but as I said, in the case of humans, I know what's in the next slide. You don't know what's in the next slide, so I can teach you. I can also cheat you. And therefore, when macaques tactically deceive each other, do they know the mental state? I'll give you a quick example. A dominant individual is chasing a subordinate individual when he suddenly stops. He is running otherwise. He suddenly stops, stands up on his hind legs, looks into the distance and gives an alarm call that he would normally give to a leopard. So immediately the individual chasing him stops, starts looking for the leopard, and this individual disappears. Right? This is deception. But the question is, have I learned that whenever he chases me, give the call of the leopard or look for the leopard and he will stop? Or is it that he doesn't know there's a leopard, neither do I know there is no leopard, but let me make him believe there's a leopard by giving a call. I know I'm not believing in a leopard now, but I'll make him believe in the leopard. This is this famous cry wolf story, right? This is how human deception works. And we don't know whether that's how it works for macaques, but we think not. And I'll bring this up in the discussion. They are also capable of developing very complex communication systems, which I won't go into now. And these suggest, very importantly, that they possibly have a conception of the self. They know I am different from you. Now, we of course know this to a much more sophisticated extent, but the evidence that we have of their knowledge, how they store this knowledge, how they act upon this knowledge, clearly and how they deceive each other, seems to tell us that they have some conception of an objective self, and this seems to have evolved before that of the great apes. For a long time, people thought the great apes and humans were the only group of species that had an objective sense of the self, but our evidence seems to show us that macaques may have it. Of course, it will vary in degree, but I think it's important. And this kind of a concept of an objective self may lead to certain kinds of self-referential behaviors. When do I stand? When do I go? When do I call? And I perhaps are able to develop belief systems. I will make him believe that there is a leopard here. I will also try to understand why that individual is approaching me and not the other individual, right? And these allow them to develop belief systems which allow them to model. You must be doing this as opposed to what I do. And that allows me to perhaps take certain decisions about you. However, they may hold erroneous beliefs, right? And they fail to project these experiences when looking at the other behaviors. And I'll give you an example from my own life. So basically, human beings develop belief systems in the course of their lives. They are not born with an inherent knowledge of one's mind and the mind of others, right? You learn this as you go along. So we have twin children, and we were teaching them how to play hide and seek. They were, I think, about 3.5 or 4 years old, and we hid our daughter behind some curtains, and we asked our son to come look for her. And I called out, when he was looking for her, I called out and said, "Don't make a noise." And she said, "All right." Right? So she knows that she shouldn't make a noise. That's why she acknowledged it and said, "All right." But she doesn't recognize that acknowledging that verbally is a giveaway. So therefore, perfect deception happens after the age of 6 or 7, when you're able to recognize that your mental state may be different from the other individual's mental state. And very tragically, in certain situations, such as in autism, perhaps this ability to differentiate between different mental states does not develop. It's one of the situations in autism, but that's another story. Right. So let me just take just 2 minutes. I'll just do 2 slides and then I'll stop. And that's just to come back to consciousness. So are bonnet macaques conscious? And again, the simple answer is, I do not know. However, there are certain implications. First is I should give you examples of very complex, cognitively driven behavioral performances, but can I ascribe this to them being conscious is an important question. If you may have seen people sleepwalk, are they conscious? Possibly not. You may have been in the car with me and I'm driving and discussing consciousness with you. Do I remember how many times I pressed the brake or changed the gears or pressed the clutch? I don't. So clearly I was driving unconsciously. So we can carry out very complex tasks unconsciously or with the mechanisms being subconscious, but sometimes we bring it to consciousness. As I say, let's not talk about consciousness. Now the traffic is terrible, we are in Majestic, I need to focus on the road. Then I know how many times I'm swerving left or right, I'm pressing the brake or not. I've brought driving into the conscious domain. So it's possible to be very complex and still not be conscious. So we do not know what's happening with the macaques. The principal problem, of course, is that of top-down consciousness. We always seem to define conscious phenomena in terms of what we do, and therefore in other beings we are not able to understand how it manifests, and this is a problem, right? So the complexities of human consciousness becomes our model. I test whether other individuals or other species are conscious or not depending on how I am conscious, and this is a completely evolutionarily wrong thing to do. Macaques evolved far before us. The dogs that we stay with evolved far before us. So their consciousness may have taken forms which are very different from the forms of consciousness we have. And so by bringing in the human consciousness model on them is an imposition that is scientifically unjustified and perhaps extremely unfair. What we need to do is have deep naturalistic observations of cognitive decision making. In response to the realities of the everyday, we need to explore mechanisms by which individuals may be able to synthesize their various subjective experiences to take innovative decisions in the short term and perhaps during their challenging life histories in the long term. Every macaque is taking a decision in Bandipur, knowing fully well that there are social decisions. Some of them are life-risking decisions. Is there a leopard in that area where I'm going? Right? How do you synthesize these various knowledge systems and take a particular decision? So adopting the current concepts, maybe macaques are perceptually conscious, they are aware of their mental states to the extent they know they are hungry or they are thirsty, they are afraid or they are not afraid. They may be phenomenologically conscious, they may be having some subjective awareness of the decisions they are taking, but we will never know whether a bonnet macaque is phenomenally conscious. Does she feel pain? Does she feel pleasure? We will also not know whether she is reflectively conscious. Can she think about the decisions she's making? You know that you made a mistake by coming to this talk. So you can think about your mental state that you're going through when you're at the talk. That is called being reflective. We have no clue whether macaques are. But by extension, I have no clue what Madhusudan is thinking unless he tells me. And if he doesn't tell me, or if he's an individual who cannot speak, I will never know whether he can reflect. Simple behavioral analysis will not tell me whether you can reflect on your thoughts, right? And that could be a potential problem here. However, there is some ethical considerations we must bring in, and this to me is very important. First, the cognitive capabilities and decision-making processes that we have talked about in Bonnet Macaques, having been established, what kind of ethical principles should we guide our treatment of them? Even when I say that you do apparently unobtrusive behavioral studies. I followed macaques for many, many years with just a pair of binoculars, just trying to note down their behaviors. And this is called non-invasive studies because I'm not interfering with them, I'm not collecting blood samples, I'm not shooing them off, I'm not feeding them, I'm just observing them. Now, how many of you in this room would love being followed by an individual with a pair of binoculars for 4 years of your lives? And I can bet you none of you will say yes. Then why do we think the macaques are saying yes? It's just that we don't care. Just that either we feel we are superior to them, we have a right to walk over them, and this is what we did with other human communities 200 years ago, and that's what we are still doing with other human communities. We don't care. So what hope for macaques? But I think it's important to think about it. Secondly, is there any fear that over time more attention will be focused on charismatic species? Are we only going to think of chimpanzees and macaques and not about scorpions or fish or insects? And we neglect other simpler beings, although they may have very, very sophisticated cognitive abilities that we don't even care to know. And finally, let us assume that an individual is not conscious, or we are not able to demonstrate it. Should we not then say that since these individuals have evolved over millions of years, they have lived very successful lives without getting exterminated, they are clearly evolutionarily successful, do we pay them less attention simply because they don't have a brain? Right? So there's a philosopher, Maxine Johnston, and she suggests that the amoeba is a conscious being. Why? Because an amoeba is swimming along, and you put a drop of acid in front of it, it stretches out a pseudopodium, senses the pH gradient, and when it's too acidic, it withdraws the pseudopodium and swims in the opposite direction. Now, according to Maxine, why is this not consciousness? Why do we only need to invoke consciousness in the brain? What other beings have? The amoeba is far more successful. The cockroach is far more successful than we ever are. Why is consciousness so important? Just because it's important for us? How then should we treat these other species? Okay, I'll finish. This slide, I love this picture. It was taken by an American photographer called Mary Ellen Marks, who came to India in the early 60s. And it's a beautiful picture. But for me, it's what is most fascinating about it is the closeness of the human and the non-human. And this is something which I would say is uniquely Oriental, maybe even uniquely Indian, because the way traditional societies, Indian traditional societies, have looked at other beings is remarkably different from how science has looked at it. Traditionally, and whether these are religious beliefs or other kinds of philosophical traditions, they've always believed in the continuum that exists across species, across beings, and that guides the way they treat them, or how they relate to them, or what kind of bonding they develop with them. And for us as scientists, I think what is extremely important is we've completely neglected their ways of knowing. How does a community which has lived in forests for centuries, how do they know how to avoid the tiger, how to hunt the deer, right? So clearly they predict behavior. They clearly predict perhaps cognitive abilities of these individuals, but they use different methodologies from what we do in science. Is it not important for us to now take stock of other ways of knowing other than what we do in science? Of course, I'm not going to spend any time here, but there are a whole range of individuals and a whole range of organizations who have helped me. But I will end, again, I will go back to the artist and the poet. This is a very famous painting which was done in the 16th century Europe by Peter Bruegel the Elder, and it shows two monkeys. These are African guenons who are chained, and behind you see the port of Delft in Holland, which was then a leading colonial power, and you can see the prosperity with the ships sailing out, and one of those ships must have brought these two monkeys and chained them to this. There's a very famous, a very favorite poet of mine, Wisława Szymborska from Poland, and she won the Nobel Prize for literature for perhaps the smallest body of work that any literature Nobel Prize has been given to. And she was in the Dahlem Museum in Berlin when she saw this painting, and she came out of the museum and sat down and wrote a little poem after seeing this picture, and that's what I will end with. This is what I see in my dreams about final exams. Two monkeys chained to the floor sit on the windowsill. The sky behind them flutters. The sea is taking its bath. The exam is history of mankind. I stammer and hedge. One monkey stares and listens with mocking disdain. The other seems to be dreaming away. But when it's clear, I don't know what to say. He prompts me with a gentle clinking of his chain. Thank you. Sorry, it took too much time.
Thanks a lot, Professor, for the talk. Now we have some time for question and answer. So if any one of you have any questions, please.
Yeah, no question is unimportant. So please don't feel shy or hesitate. Please just let me know what you think.
Thank you for the wonderful talk. My question is, when you're talking about triadic interactions between A, B, and C, aren't there any instances where B tries to leave, but she comes back? A?
Are you asking whether that happens?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have not systematically documented it. There are always interactions that are happening one after the other. What is very difficult is to determine the causal connections between these different behavioral sequence or behaviors in a sequence, right? I'll give you just one quick example, deception. Now, if I cheat you, how do you know you've been cheated? Right? Now, you can get angry, but you could get angry with me because you're frustrated. You couldn't do what you wanted to do. My cheating prevented you from doing it. You could be just angry. So how would I know that you've actually perceived being deceived? And the answer, one of the suggestions has been that you will practice counter deception. You will immediately respond by deceiving me. Now, very rarely have we seen this. I've never seen this in macaques. Even in chimpanzees or bonobos, I think there are just a few instances of these. So in some sense, we are trying desperately to try and understand whether individuals understand what they are experiencing, which is what you're asking about. I don't have an answer to this, but it's interesting that they are perhaps, I was telling you about how they could have a wrong belief system, and I'll just give an example. So there was a macaque, a macaque that was looking at two other macaques on another tree, and they were about to mate. There was a male and a female, and they were about to mate, and he gave an alarm call. He was looking at them, and he gave an alarm call. And the moment he gave the alarm call, the other two individuals separated and they started looking for the predator. And then this individual did something extremely interesting. He actually climbed down the tree and started walking towards the other tree on the ground, continuously giving the alarm call. Now, if you actually see macaques, when they've seen leopards, they will not descend for days till they're absolutely sure that the leopard is not there. Not only that, they will never come back to that area for a few days at least, knowing the leopard's there. So coming down the tree and walking immediately told me that there couldn't be a leopard there, right? So it was like my daughter. She didn't realize that by saying all right, she was giving herself away. This individual was giving himself away. If he got off the tree, I knew there was no leopard. So I was no longer deceived. But the other two individuals didn't seem to recognize it. They kept looking for the leopard. So in some sense, if you have an incomplete theory of mind, you're not able to show compatible behaviors that will convince the other individual of what you're actually trying to construct. But then if the other individual also has an incomplete theory of mind, they fail to see this discrepancy. So it could be that B may come back, B may not come back, but why she comes back, we don't know.
Awesome.
Sorry, long answer.
Thank you.
Sorry? Oh, this is basically through descriptions, oral descriptions. In some cases now we have video cameras, so we record these behaviors, but it's basically through observations and recordings.
I had a question over here.
Yeah.
I was curious about lemurs and primates that precede, macaques, like slow lorises, lemurs.
Yes, exactly.
So that particular category, because they're considered to be predecess, what we consider monkeys and apes.
Yeah.
Would those behaviors be seen in those individuals and the hierarchy and the dominance that
Yeah.
you mentioned?
Yeah. No, so the simple answer there again, and this flies against the principles of Western science, is that you have to go and discover for yourself what they are capable of. I think knowing what A does and going to a species B and saying they are evolutionally connected tells you nothing, right? You discover, and this is what is very nice about the social sciences. So, and that's what we are now trying to bring into our work. We think that we spend too much time looking at other species as objects and use these so-called natural science methods, which really treat them as objects. But on the other hand, if you look at ethnographic methods or what the social sciences do, they do something called a grounded theory, which is you go in with a clear, open mind, you start understanding the individuals, the community, the society that you're working with, human or non-human. In our case, non-human, but it's usually with humans. And then you develop your own ideas about what could be happening. What do they know? How are they using that to take certain decisions? And that's called grounded theory, because your theory is based bottom up, by observations, by understanding, and not imposed on them from other communities that you know. So in that sense, therefore, if I have to understand the slow loris or the slender loris or the lemurs, I need to understand their lives, I need to understand the decisions they're making, and then construct hypotheses of what do they know, what do they not know. This is going to cognition. But even observationally, you may know whether they have hierarchies or not. And it can be fairly complex. In fact, let me take this opportunity to tell you that in the case of the bonnet macaques, the male dominance hierarchy is entirely based on their biology. So when they are very strong, they are dominant. When they are in middle-aged and have good body condition, they are dominant. So as they are young, they are very subordinate, but then they rise in the hierarchy as they become mature. And then as they start aging, they start falling in the hierarchy. Simple. There are other strategies. They form coalitions. So a few of them get together and dominate another dominant individual, and within them, then they struggle maybe. For females, it's completely cultural. So A's daughters will be dominant to B and her daughters, and they will be dominant to C and her daughters. So it's like being born into a Brahmin family or not a Brahmin family. If you're born into a Brahmin family, you don't have a choice. You're a Brahmin, right? It's a bit like that. So they get a hierarchical position below that of their mothers, and that's culturally inherited. There can be situations where it changes, but very rarely. So we've seen in Bandipur several situations where hierarchies amongst females have changed, but on an average, I would say that since we've studied them for 22 years and we've looked at the stability of the hierarchy, and some cases where it changes, it's maybe only 2 or 3% of all females will see a change in hierarchy over their lifetimes. So it's very stable. So cultures can be more stable than biologically determined factors. Sorry, can I just come back to you? 1 minute, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
No, one thing that came to my mind is this Herzog's movie, Aguirre, the Wrath of God. I don't know.
Sorry?
Aguirre, the Wrath of God.
Huh.
I don't know if you've seen that film, Herzog's.
Oh, no.
Oh, okay. No, there was a scene where the Caucasian people are giving a Bible to the
Okay, right.
and the native person is holding it to the ear, and the Caucasians find it very funny.
Right.
But this is also cognition
Absolutely.
of a different set of individuals.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is what I was saying. So I brought in the idea of indigenous communities and how they learn and how they respond. And we are losing that knowledge because they are slowly being marginalized. They're already marginalized and they're disappearing. But we can even extend that further to non-humans themselves. So they have evolved their own systems of knowing, of behaving, of deciding, and perhaps of being conscious in different ways. I don't think we have any hopes of understanding their consciousness because we continue to use human models. We don't have a choice. We are humans, so I can't go beyond that. But nevertheless, at least I think we need to develop healthy respect for the capacities of other beings, and that, as I pointed out, should be independent of whether they are conscious or not. The fact that they can take such complex decisions, it makes us wonder what else they are capable of. And every individual, whatever species they belong to, has certain capacities which we will never discover until we look for them. And I think
Absolutely, yeah.
that's what we need to do. Sorry, can I just come back to you, Roshni?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, you were asking something.
My question is, by observing these macaques' social behavior, do you think we human beings are human society will ever be outpaced by the society of these animals?
Will they be replaced, you're saying? I'm sorry, I missed that.
No, will there be any day when our society will be outpaced by the non-human societies?
Okay, will be, oh, I missed the critical words, I'm sorry.
Outpaced.
Outpaced.
by-
Oh, they already are. Oh, look at the COVID virus. It can kill us all. I mean, so if you look at it that way, so that's the point I wanted to make, that when you consider a particular individual or a particular community or a particular species, you have to look at them in terms of themselves and what they have experienced and evolved through, rather than comparing them with us, right? So, of course, you know this very popular belief that if there is a nuclear holocaust, we will be the first to go, but perhaps the cockroach will not go, because the cockroach might be able to compartmentalize heavy metals. They can live on human hair, they can live on candle wax, they can live for months on human hair and candle wax. So clearly they are far, far better at surviving than we are. And yet we seem to think we are superior because we build computers and go to the moon, right? The point is that the bonnet macaque or the cockroach does not need to go to the moon. It does not need to make a computer. So you have to see how within its environment within which it lives, how successful it is in being able to survive and reproduce.
But there is a famous equation called the great equation of astrobiology.
Okay.
Which suggests the existence of different sophisticated
Yes,
societies.
yes, absolutely. Yes.
Is there any chance that we will be outpaced by others?
I don't know. I really don't know. But I would like you to rethink what we mean by sophisticated. So what do we place a premium on? That's what is important. And I would suggest that we should not use our intellectual capacities to judge other species or other individuals. We should look at them in terms of how successful they are in their own lives. I think that's basically the philosophical point I wanted to make.
Fundamentally correct. Which society gave birth to this human?
It keeps evolving. It keeps changing. There have been those which have been exterminated under certain conditions and those that have continued to thrive. But like I said, we are moving clearly. Our world is moving to a place where we will be the first to go. I have no doubts about it whatsoever, I think. Sorry, can I come back to you later? Yeah.
So I actually, about this point about what human beings have decided is the marker of what is
Yes.
successful, intelligent, sophisticated, right?
yes.
We've created this criteria based off of our framework, our
Absolutely.
civilization. And
Sorry, just to add to that, Roshni, it's not just what we know about ourselves, but what we place value on.
Right, yeah.
That's why I wanted to give that example, that cognitive sophistication may be one thing, but if it's slow,
yeah.
don't have it.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
learn by brute force and solve your problem.
Yeah.
What are we paying attention? So this is a philosophical question, right?
Yeah.
Someone might say, I may live for just 50 years, but in that 50 years, if I've been able to crack this problem, I have had a successful life.
Right.
That's not how the macaques live, right? So for
Yeah.
them, it's longevity.
So
perhaps,
so
or
this this behavior. So I have a cat at home, and her behavior is very interesting. You know, the way that she judges what is a danger, what is safe, you know, and the body language as well, reading her body language. She's reading my body language, you know.
Yes, absolutely.
And cats are very interesting because they're not, they're not like big cats. They're not the top of the food chain in that sense. They have predators. They have they also have prey as well.
Yeah.
So she's constantly, I see her judging when to play the role of the predator and the prey. She's sort of in this mid zone, you know.
Yes.
And so her behavior kind of reflects that
Sure.
kind of thing as well.
Sure,
So I've seen-
absolutely. And this is
Yeah.
true for every individual of every species. They are always evaluating their environment, taking a decision. And when I say environment, it could be the physical environment or their social environment, and they're always taking decisions. And so what are we going to measure? So there are two ways of looking at it. One is to measure very simply survival or reproduction or whatever, and then we say, hey, you're not doing so well. There are others who are doing far better than us. Or we don't do these comparisons at all and say, let's judge a cockroach for being a cockroach. Let's judge a human being for being a human being. Let's not compare across categories. And that, I think, is a fundamental problem. And it's the same problem that strikes in our everyday life when you compare vegetarianism with non-vegetarianism or homeopathy with allopathy. We are just comparing apples with oranges because motivations are very different, capabilities are very different, our inherent choices are so different. How do you even compare them?
Yeah, and also, I mean, the kind of abilities that this particular cat has, people being able to sort of pretend to go in a direction and deceive.
Yes.
That is something humans can't do. That is something that is, I would say, much more advanced.
I
you know,
wouldn't
so-
know that.
But,
Maybe you have to look at different situations and judge them for themselves, but I think it's difficult to come to that conclusion. Sorry, someone had a hand up here. Oh, okay, yeah. But there was also someone this side, I think. But anyway, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a general question. Do you think biology is mature enough to answer consciousness? And if not, is it like medicine before germ theory? Are we waiting for the next big thing to be able to answer consciousness? And if we already can answer consciousness, then what would be the definition of consciousness?
Okay. So I don't have a straightforward answer to you. See, it's very different. Physics looks at life very differently from how biology does, right? So physics, because it deals essentially with very simple systems where there are not too many parameters playing a role, are able to formulate very, very strong explanatory principles, right? So molecular. So when you look at two molecules interacting, the number of parameters that will influence these two molecules, the interaction, maybe the ionic strength of the solution, the temperature, the pH, and that's enough, right? And you can predict how the molecules will interact. But when you go to macaques from molecules, we are dealing with such complex systems, and not only are there many, many factors which are operating and deciding on how the macaque will behave, there are also, each of these factors may be probabilistic, right? So therefore, it's very difficult to predict. You know, there was a very interesting paper on cancer, on malignancies that appeared, where somebody did a really strong meta-analysis of various forms of malignancies and they looked at some 40, 50 factors to try and see which is the most common factor which could determine the appearance of a malignancy, of a cancer. And you know what came up? Chance, which means basically there were no factors that could predict across cancers, which means it's chance. And of course, they used a more catchy term. They called it bad luck, right? Now, consciousness, that's one problem. Consciousness can manifest in so many ways. It depends on how you're actually trying to understand it, what are the mechanisms that you're using. But even more fundamentally, it's about definitions. How do you define consciousness, right? If you say that I look at the sky and I see it's blue, and I say, wow, what a beautiful blue that sky is. No one, no machine, no other human being will ever know what your feeling of that blueness is. And if that is consciousness, we will never have an answer, is what I would say. You know, people have tried to see, okay, when you're saying this is such a blue sky, which neurons are firing? How do you detect causality? right? How do you know that it's because of this? So you could stimulate that neuron, but I don't think it's just that one neuron that's responsible for consciousness, you know. So, and we now know the redundancy in the brain, and I'm coming down to the brain because we are looking for mechanisms of consciousness, and I'm not going into the more esoteric, complex definitions, just looking at a neuronal basis. You know, there have been studies which have shown using natural strokes when individuals get strokes, that when I say apple to you, right, you know that it has a particular shape, it has a particular color, it has a particular taste and a smell, and also that it fell on Newton's head, and it's something your mother gave for your tiffin in school but which you disliked. There's so many associations of an apple. What's fascinating is that each of these things that I mentioned is stored in different parts of the brain. And people have had strokes, they will tell you everything about an apple except its shape. And there are people who can describe everything about an apple except its color, because that part of the brain has been affected. Now, why do we have this redundancy? We have this redundancy because if you're dependent evolutionarily on an apple for your life, even if you have a stroke, you should still be able to recognize an apple using other faculties, right? Now, I'm just giving this as an analogy for consciousness, and consciousness is so complex. There's so many. So the primary center, the primary cortex, is the one that integrates information, right? So when people are sleepwalking, they are carrying out all the motor tasks, but it's not being integrated by the primary cortex, and therefore there is no recollection or no awareness or no memory of this, right? So even that is fine, right? So you know, people have generated what is called blind sight. People have blind sight because of strokes. Macaques can also be, you can generate blind sight. So with a human patient of blind sight, you hold up 3 fingers, or you hold up an apple and you say, what am I holding? And the person will say, I don't know. I can't see. I'm blind. So then you say, guess. And that individual will say, maybe an apple? How does that individual know? So the brain is processing information. There is integration, and the patient knows, the patient is able to say it's an apple, but the patient doesn't know that it's an apple. So the primary centers are not able to tell the patient that you're seeing an apple, right? So this is so complex. So, and if you see individuals carry out complex tasks, you still don't know whether they are consciously doing it or unconsciously. That's why I gave you the example of driving or crossing the road. We do so many complex tasks without thinking about it. So yes. So we define consciousness in as various ways that we have, but I don't know whether we'll ever have an integrated final view. People are using quantum physics to try and understand the probability of having a conscious experience. So you can look at it at different levels and then try and understand it. Yes.
Basically, my question is twofold. Initially, maybe about a year ago, I had seen a documentary in which there was this rescuer who works with chimpanzees, and he had this entire rescue center where he wanted to actually show that chimpanzees have dominance hierarchy, and once a chimpanzee had already climbed up a ladder, he gave his hand facing downwards, whereas the chimpanzee did not actually hold it like that. It held his hand, turned it upside down, so his hand was above, and then pulled him up.
Okay.
So he explained it as it's a dominance behavior where the chimpanzee believes him to be dominant. So his hand has to be on the top.
Right.
Now, the same thing when we come to humans, I'm not sure if it's instinct, I'm not sure if it is something which is built in businesses, in a lot of these classes where people are taught to be more manly, etc. When you're giving a handshake, you're told to turn your hand upwards, etc., to be more dominant.
I see.
And This was the first part. Now, at the same time, leaving primates aside, if we take our big cats, staring them in the eyes is a act of aggression. And even in martial arts or even for humans, staring in the eyes is an act of aggression.
True.
How exactly can we, whether if it's instinct or whether if it's actually there, determine that it's actually dominance or act of aggression when we are completely unrelated and do not know what's actually happening in their brain?
Sure. No, so that's a point well made. Two things. One, of course, is that every community or every group evolves their own signals, right? Now, it could be that there is a more innate genetic basis for certain kinds of signaling in certain cases, but we have ample examples of how these change, right, under different conditions, right? And social learning is very powerful, and there are wonderful examples of how even fish, with one trial, they can overturn their millions years of evolutionary decision making by one act of social learning. And I can tell you this afterwards. So, which therefore tells you that every individual, again, has different capacities, some of which, and I mentioned that here, some of which is driven by their innate abilities, some of which is learned. Right? And so therefore this norm of which way you hold your palm, I do not know whether it's inherent or whether it's something that has evolved in that community and it could be different in another community. So that's one point. So therefore we can't generalize. We have to, like I was telling her, we have to go and understand that community, look at the practices, see how they are being transmitted, and then try and understand how much of this is innate, how much of this is cultural, so-called. Of course, at one level, philosophically, nature and nurture are continuous. And therefore, in some cases, and I can give you examples later, we do not know whether it's nature or nurture. So broadly speaking, these categories are human-made only for our ease of discussion, our ease of understanding, but they don't have any fundamental, inherent capacity to be defined such. You know what I'm saying? So nature and nurture is convenient. Right? So the mind and pure behavior are two ends of the spectrum, nature and nurture. So we always pick on the two ends and we say, this is what it is, this is. We forget that there's gray in between, which we, for purposes of convenience, we ignore and shove under the carpet. Right? So that's one thing. But the second thing, I just quickly tell you, the eyes is really important. Right? And the eyes is important for many of these species. In fact, the only reason why in 40 years that I've been with macaques, I've been bitten only once is possibly the most fundamental principle that I followed is the one that you pointed out. If a macaque looked at me, I looked away. So looking away is always a disarming gesture, saying that I'm not interested in you. And I don't know whether you know, but there was this prescription that was given to women traveling in New York, by the New York metro late in the night, when there was some acts of violence or whatever against them by groups of men. And the simplest solution to this, which was the advice given to women, is read a book, don't look at anyone. Get on, sit, read a book. When your station comes, you go. Be unaware of who's around you. And I think the simple answer is, if I look at someone, I attract attention. And then other things get, I can detect nervousness, I can detect boredom, I can detect happiness in your eyes and in your other gestures. On the other hand, with baboons, there have been experiments done in the laboratory which have shown they've got them trained to certain human faces generated on the computer, and then they changed features of these faces one by one to see if the baboon still recognizes this as the same face. And it turns out that you can change any feature and the baboon will still consider it the same face except the eyes. You can keep all other features constant and just change the eyes and the baboon fails to recognize it as the same individual. So the eyes are important not only for identification of individuals, but it also might be important to read eye language, like body language, to know what could be your next step in your behavior.
So we'll take one last question.
Yeah, sorry.
The rest of you all can discuss with Professor
Sorry?
over coffee. The rest of you all can discuss with you over coffee.
Sure. Oh, that'll be very nice.
Sir, so like I have a question and I was very curious about it for a long time, that macaques or other primates who are very close to humans feel emotions in a such depth like we do, like grief and overthinking and happiness, sadness, and like how much depth they can think of, and it is correct or not to compare with us or them, because we are humans and we don't know the perspective of macaques, and we
Sure.
can only compare like how do we think,
Yeah.
and if it matches or not with them. So it is correct or not, and how much emotions and how much depth they think.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll give you a very disappointing answer, which is we don't know. And we will never know. And I'll tell you why. What you said at the end is actually right. We are different as humans. So we have certain emotions which we recognize in ourselves. And then how do we extrapolate that to macaques or gibbons or gorillas or chimpanzees or cockroaches or whatever, right? How would we know? One, of course, is that, behaviorally we are not able to read certain individuals, certain species as well as others. But even then, there's a more fundamental problem. If I now suddenly stop, okay, I'll give you a better example. There are some of my friends who refuse to go to cinema with me because in every film I go to, I weep. I'm not joking. Maybe 90% of the films I see, I weep. Do you have I don't have an idea why I'm weeping. Is it sorrow, joy, just a powerful emotion? Is it frustration? Is it boredom? I don't know. Because you could be self-delusional. You might think you're feeling happy, but I don't know what feeling happy is. So the question is, if you sometimes don't even understand yourself, how the hell do you understand a macaque? How do you understand the person sitting next to you? I mean, most of our maladjustments in our daily lives is because we read the glass as half empty and someone reads it as half full. And that's so fundamental, not only in how it's generated, but how we interpret it, that I don't think there is any way you will know someone fully. So therefore, if I say sadness and I see grief, if I say that, if you're weeping at the end of my talk, you must be so happy that you heard my talk, it's just a conjecture. And I will never, ever know. I will never, ever know. Neither will you. You might, there's so many occasions when I say, why did I think this way? Why did I weep? I shouldn't have, or I should have, whatever it is. It's too complex. We don't understand it. There is no one single definition for it. So, but it's nice to ascribe it because then it allows you to behave in particular ways. If you feel someone is sad and you put an arm around that individual's shoulder, maybe it's for the good of both of you. So that's fine. We do have these ways in which we feel our way forward. But if you want to objectively know, scientifically know it, as we define it here, we don't know. We'll never know. I know it's disappointing, but that's okay.
Before we conclude, Professor, we have a few questions from our online live stream also.
Okay.
So I'll just ask one question. So the question is that we have research that shows that cattle, goats, animals are capable of experiencing pain and suffering,
Yes.
along with growing evidence of sentience in fish. So then basically they ask, what are your thoughts on the ethical implications of our growing understanding of human
Okay.
consciousness?
So basically
Sorry.
the question is that if we know other beings feel pain or they are sentient or they have some emotions, since we were talking about emotions, how should we ethically behave with them? Again, I don't have an answer. I think how our ethics is extremely personal, right? Each individual in this room will behave very differently towards another individual depending on what they understand of it. Now, even if I tell you that the fish feels pain, I can tell let's say, since I come from that community, I can tell 100 Bengalis that fish feel terrible pain. Would you stop eating fish? I would really like to know how many would. Right? Now, I'm not saying that's good or bad. All I'm saying is that each individual has to decide for themselves how they're going to behave towards the next individual. There's so many times I hurt the people in my own family. Sometimes I knowingly do it, sometimes I unknowingly do it. So these decisions are not all or none. They are not black or white. You have to decide for yourself what are the principles you're going to follow, where do you draw a line which you will not cross, or you cross them when the time comes. And I don't think for a biological being, there's ever going to be one way in which they respond, even across space and time. I will behave one way yesterday and I will behave one way tomorrow. And that depends on the circumstances. So my short answer to this is that you decide how you want to behave.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Professor,
Thank you.
again for the amazing talk.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here today. So our so we'll have more talks every month. So the next talk is on 26th of September. It's called Seeing the Unseen, Tracing the Fingerprints of Quantum Mechanics. So it will be about how you can see fingerprints of quantum mechanics. It will be on a Saturday. So I hope to see all of you for that talk too. Thanks again. So I'm sorry for the people who could not ask questions. You can discuss
Over
closer
coffee.
after coffee. Yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.